Welcome to another episode of Silk and Steel Podcast. I am your host, Carl Zha. Today we're having our returning guest, Mr. Xiangyu, the Taiwanese Communist rapper who we have been in conversation with on History of Taiwan series. But welcome to the show, Xiangyu.
Hello, good to be back.
Yes, so today we're going to do something different. Rather than continue the Taiwan series, which will continue, we decided to do a special episode on the send-off of the former Taiwanese leader, Lee Tenghui. As many of you know, Lee Tenghui just recently died. And in Chinese, we call it, what is it? Not 开关定论. Is it 开关定论or...
I don't think so.
盖棺定论.
Yeah, like it means when you close the coffin, you pass the judgment. So that's what we're doing today. So Xiangyu, you are, your background is you have a Taiwanese background. So I will let you start talking about Lee Tenghui and his legacy on Taiwan.
So first off, I want to begin because I think this goes out to some of the more how do you say backwards Chinese nationalists, because there are there's like progressive nationalism and there's some backwards nationalism and
reactionary. I think
yes, it's kind of reactionary. Yeah. So there's a lot of people who say, oh, Lee Tenghui was a traitor because he's possibly Japanese, because he was possibly in fact born as a result of rape by a Japanese officer. And whether or not this is true, we don't know. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, your blood doesn't really determine your politics. And even if that were the case, he was raised by a Taiwanese father and a Taiwanese mother. So that really doesn't have to do with his the fact that he might have had a Japanese father, biological father, doesn't really mean much in the grand scheme of things. I mean, Comrade Kim Jong-un in Korea.
There are plenty of Chinese traitors. We don't need to blame other ethnicities or bad blood. One example I like to point out is during the Hong Kong protests. Some Chinese nationalists are claiming that the people who participated in the Hong Kong protests or the Hong Kong protest leaders are of the Vietnamese descent. The
Joshua
implication,
Wong, because his parents were Yuan Hua of Chinese diaspora in Vietnam.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's true. During late 1970s, there was a wave of the boat people that landed in Hong Kong. These are mostly Vietnamese Chinese people who left Vietnam as a result of the Vietnamese unification and the socialist transformation in Vietnam. Many of them landed in Hong Kong. But I find the suggestion that the Hong Kong protesters are Vietnamese descent, it's basically a racist assertion. It's like there's no, like, the good Chinese born boys and girls would never participate in something so damaging to China. No, that's not true. we don't know a lot of people. I mean, we have like people like Melissa Chan, right? She's Hong Kong born, Hong Kong raised. I mean, she's perfectly capable of being the spokesperson for Western imperialist interest. So let's just I'm glad we're getting that out of the way. A person's genetic composition has nothing to do with their political ideology. What we stand for is people, who have the progressive ideas. We're not standing for people because they have the right blood.
Yes, I mean, if you look at an example, how a few years ago, Kim Jong-nam from Korea was assassinated, right? Because he was working with the CIA. Now, Kim Jong-nam is full Korean, whereas Kim Jong-un is a fourth Japanese. By reactionary logic, wouldn't Kim Jong-un be the reactionary one since he's part Japanese? So it's a ridiculous it's a path you don't want to take when you're making political discussions. It's just racism and like backwards like race science and
reactionary racism.
Yeah, it's reactionary.
Well,
It's something that we should
racism
avoid.
is reactionary. But you mentioned that Kim Jong Il is 1/4 Japanese.
Jong-un.
That's a fact not many people know about, actually.
Yeah, Kim Jong-un is because his mother was somebody in his family was Zainichi, like 在日朝鲜人. And then like they were mixed with Japanese like through marriage. So
Okay.
and then they went back to Korea and then she was Kim Jong-il's mistress, but don't tell people in North Korea
that. No worries. I don't think anybody from PTRK is tuning in.
Yeah.
So we're safe.
Anyways, but what we do want to mention is the Taiwan's history under Japanese colonialism. I'm getting my N's and L's mixed up like you are now. So there is I think we talked about this in our series, but for those who haven't tuned in, Taiwan was a Japanese colony from 1895 until 1945 as a result of China losing the first Sino-Japanese War. I have it remembered as 甲午战争, so first or second I had to think about it. And so I mean Lee Tenghui was born in what year was he born in? He was I think in the...
He was born during the Japanese occupation.
Yes.
Sure, yeah.
I just don't have the year memorized.
I don't think he was born before 1894.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. Let me just look up what year he was born. Okay, he was born in 1923. So that means when he was... So around the time World War II began, Japan really pushed... because before when Taiwan was a Japanese colony, they didn't really know what to do with Taiwan culturally. They were like, okay, should we just can we assimilate them? Should we treat them like a colony? What should we do? And for the longest time, they just kind of did what past Chinese rulers did, more or less, and just kind of kept the land-only elite, the landlord class in charge, basically the aristocracy, and then they just kind of ruled through them as a medium. But then towards the end, they were like, okay, well, Japan needs to expand its empire, and it needs more people, and it needs more talent, and it needs these people to be more assimilated, especially since these people are ethnic Chinese. And if we want to send them to war, some of them are sent to the mainland to fight, their Chinese brothers and sisters. You have to get them to just kind of think of themselves as Japanese. So then Lee Tenghui that happened during his formative years. And another interesting thing, a while back, I saw a status posted by I think he's well known in leftist circles. I'm just not going to name names. It's not necessary. Saying that Taiwan separatists today are like that because they're actually leftovers from the Japanese era, the Japanese colonial era, and they're not just subjects, but they're actually Japanese or whatever. But then so then it's like, okay, that's actually not the case. But and it kind of obfuscates reality, because what really happened was during that time there was something called the Kominka Movement, the 皇民化运动 in Chinese. What it means, it's like the movement for Japanization. Huangmin or Komin means like subject of the emperor. So if you meet certain qualifications during that time, like you're significantly Japanicized, you speak Japanese at home, you practice Shintoism, you do all this stuff, then you can go through this process. It's a little ceremony. What you do is you go and you renounce your Chinese ancestry. You actually renounce your ancestors, like their like your, what is it, 族谱?
Yeah,
your family
for
Bibles.
People who are listening in who don't have a Chinese cultural background, I just like to point out, ancestors is very important. Being part of Chinese, it's like the ancestral worship is very center of the Chinese culture, and to renounce your ancestor, there's a term in Chinese called 数典忘祖, right? It's like you forget your ancestry. It's a very grave sin. It's a crime. right? Okay, but
in English,
this,
when we want to get into when we are mad at someone, we might say "fuck you," but in Chinese we say "cao ni zuzong." Well, that's not all we say, but that's one of the things we say, which means "fuck your ancestors." It's
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
so. So there's that process, and then you adopt new Japanese ancestors in that process of becoming a Huangmin or a Komin imperial subject. And what that does is you're upgraded from just typical Taiwanese colonial subject to I don't know, technically you're kind of Japanese, but come on, really, like you're not really Japanese, but
You're not real because
you're one
at the
step
time
closer.
there are actual Japanese settlers in Taiwan. They are the first class citizens in Taiwan.
But
But I mean,
second
they're a
class in
very small
Japan.
number. I'm sorry?
But second class in Japan. After the war, a
Yeah.
lot of them ended up going back to Japan, and they're called Taisheng in Chinese or Taisei in Japanese, which means like born in Taiwan basically. And then they were ridiculed for speaking Japanese with a Taiwanese accent and just stuff like that. So it's there's that. And then so if you look at Taiwan's population in around 1945, it was 6 million. And among the 6 million, only 2% of the population went through this process. And what was that 2% mostly what did that 2% mostly consist of? It was, the landed aristocracy and some of the intellectuals, and then like some of the industrial capitalists, the small class that
We can call them what they are, collaborators.
that's exactly what they are. And it so happens that Lee Tenghui came from this sort of background, and so did Tsai Ing-wen's father, the current leader of Taiwan. Her father was actually sent to northeastern China during the Second Sino-Japanese War, and he was there fixing airplanes for the Imperial Japanese Army.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's too bad the Northeast Anti-Japanese Resistance Alliance didn't get to him first.
Yeah. So I think this is some of the background information that one needs to know. And do you think I should just briefly introduce the process of Taiwan being retroceded to China in 1945?
Yeah.
We went over
Well,
this.
I mean, before that, I'll just quickly cover. So, I highly recommend people to go back and listen to our episode on the Taiwanese history, the part when it became the Japanese colony. But real quick,
That was part 2.
Yeah, in 1895, as a result of Qing Dynasty China losing those first Sino-Japanese War, Taiwan was ceded to Japan. But this process didn't go. It wasn't a smooth handover. There was resistance. In fact, at the time, the people in Taiwan they were very disheartened by the fact that we were being ceded to Japan, but they did not want to become a part of Japan. That's why they actually tried to claim independence. They formed. That's a real Republic of Taiwan. Oh my God, is that Lee Tenghui?
Yeah, I'm just showing people a picture of him while you're talking. Go ahead.
Okay, and so as a result of that, the Japanese were very brutal in its initial rule of Taiwan. Oh my God, that's a picture of Lee Tenghui and Chiang Kai-shek's son, Jiang Jingguo,
Yes.
the former leader of Taiwan. So that was before Lee Tenghui became the president.
Yes.
I
can't do this. You're too easy. It's too easy to distract you.
I'm getting distracted by the visage of Lee Tenghui in my face. And the first few years of Japanese colonial rule was spent to crush the indigenous resistance, both among the Han Chinese settlers in Taiwan and the actual Taiwan indigenous people in the mountains. But after they have done that, Lee Tenghui was born in 1920, so he was already born. He was born like 30 years after the initial Japanese occupation. So he's one generation removed from the initial Japanese invasion, and so at that time there was already a process was already underway to kind of make the local inhabitant to think that they're Japanese. And I like to remind people that Lee Tenghui's father, not only Lee Tenghui came from a land-owning elite family in Taiwan, but Lee Tenghui's father served as the Japanese colonial police in Taiwan. So he's like a collaborator's collaborator. I mean, he was a cop. So go ahead.
So why are we mentioning this Japanese stuff? Well, because shortly after Japanese rule, the KMT came, and part of the strife between the KMT and the population on Taiwan that already existed. There's this sort of misconception among many people in the West for some reason that like Taiwan's origin story began in 1945 or 1949 when Chiang Kai-shek went there.
Yeah.
And if that's what you if you believe that, then a lot of things just won't make sense to you, and you'll also jump to very, very strange conclusions, and you'll also get the various strands of reaction in Taiwan conflated with one another.
Yes.
Like I've seen this meme saying stuff like, "Oh, Taiwan started the Chinese Civil War." I mean, the KMT started it. You can say that, but Taiwan was a Japanese colony when this Chinese Civil War started. So how does that happen? Taiwan is just the name of the island.
I highly recommend people to go to listen to the beginning of our Taiwan series, where me and Xiangyu had gone over Taiwan history from prehistorical times up to the Dutch colonization, the Chinese immigration. We covered the in very detail from the period from 1600s up to 1945. 1950s through the Cold War. We're right now like in 1990, right? Early 2000 already.
We just finished Chen Shui-bian's leadership, so we're in the mid 2000s.
Yeah.
Later 2000s.
So please go listen to that series because you will give you a very comprehensive overview of the Taiwan political development and Taiwan's political history.
Yes. So then 1945, Japan loses World War II. So Taiwan was returned to China after 50 years of colonization per the declarations of Cairo and Potsdam. So Chiang Kai-shek sends Chen Yi to serve as the chief executive of the Taiwan provincial government. And, the KMT, the Chinese Nationalist Party, was not very popular wherever it went.
That's one way to put it. I mean the so-called National Assembly that was elected, quote unquote, in 1946. It was in many ways a sham election to legitimize Chiang Kai-shek's KMT rule because Chiang Kai-shek excluded all the opposition parties from the election. Well, namely the communists, right, who was the largest opposition party. They were totally excluded from that process because 1946, Chiang Kai-shek was in the process of ramping up the civil war against the communists, and so he used the election as a way to legitimize his own rule. But the people who were elected has very little support from the masses. I mean, much less support from people from Taiwan because Taiwan just got handed over from Japan to KMT. And go ahead.
Yes, and I want to add to that. So they were elected in 1947, but then when they went to Taiwan, they were like, okay, we're a democratic country. The so-called Republic of China is democratic, but because the majority of the Republic of China's territory has fallen to the communists, the country is incomplete and most of our population cannot vote. So therefore, we're going to suspend elections. So then everyone in the National Assembly was just appointed.
And that whole right, and the whole National Assembly was in effect until 1980. So there was no election in Taiwan until 1980s or 1996? 1996 was
the first direct election of the yes. Yeah. There were always some local elections, but the thing is, cities like you couldn't elect the mayor in Taipei or Kaohsiung because they were upgraded to zhixiashi, or like what is it like? They're cities that they're they're like provincial
directly
cities.
Centrally controlled municipalities.
Yes. So then the mayors were also appointed.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, there was also a Taiwan provincial government too, just to maintain the facade that they're like Taiwan is but a province of the broader so-called Republic of China, which consists of the mainland and Mongolia and all of that.
Yes.
But I mean, this sounds funny, but this was also a point of unity between Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong. The point of unity being this is a domestic issue that foreigners should not intervene in, and that this is an issue between two competing entities that are domestic to China, and that both Taiwan and mainland China belong to the same China. It's just that we have pretty much different factions, different cliques of rulers.
Yes.
So anyways, another thing is everyone in the National Assembly was an elite from the mainland.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, well, I mean, Taiwan is 98% Han Chinese. I mean, okay, there's also some that are like assimilated, the Plains Aboriginals, whatever. The point is, they're all like, you know, Han Chinese. What's the difference between a mainlander and you know, the people who are already on Taiwan? And for the rest of this episode, I'm going to use the terms 本省人 and 外省人. 本省人 means like native to this province, and people of this province, and it refers to everyone in Taiwan who was already there prior to 1945. And 外省人 means extra provincial people. It refers to all of the mainlanders who and their descendants who arrived in Taiwan from between 1945 and the mid 1950s. It doesn't apply to mainlanders today. They're just called 大陆人, which means mainlander, or if you're a separatist, they just call them 中国人, which means Chinese. So anyways, the government, the higher levels of government were all dominated by 外省 elite. And the 本省人, they've been under 50 years of Japanese rule. So I mean, culturally, there's already some difference, especially with the attempts of assimilation by the Japanese during its later years. But also because the early migrants to Taiwan from the mainland came predominantly from Fujian province, whereas the new arrivals from the mainland came from all over the place. You had people from like, you know, Zhejiang. Okay, people from Zhejiang also went to Taiwan like long ago. They were in a minority, but still, you had people from like, you know, like Guangdong, Guangxi, Henan,
Hunan. Yeah, all over China. I mean, there's large contingent from my home province, Sichuan, right, Chongqing, because that was the main headquarters of KMT during World War II. So there were a lot of Sichuanese soldiers that ended up got enrolled in the KMT troops and ended up going to Taiwan.
And the Air Force Academy was in Chengdu.
Yeah.
And then it got relocated to Kaohsiung in southern Taiwan. So actually, the Mandarin we speak was heavily influenced by Carl's Mandarin.
Okay.
But so the point is, I want to just briefly get into you had the 228 massacre, or the incident where you know, it was like a high point. Basically,
that was February 28th, 1947.
Yeah, basically somebody sells unlicensed cigarettes, and then she gets shot by the cops, and then people get mad. They surround the police stations, and then they get shot by the cops, and then
actually the most famous depiction of 228 is actually done by a mainland Chinese artist who was from my hometown of Chongqing, and he made the drawing under pseudonym, and then but later during the White Terrors the crackdown in Taiwan, he was arrested, accused of being a communist spy, spreading communist propaganda, and executed by the KMT.
Yeah. So basically, that marked the beginning of White Terror in Taiwan and martial law. And martial law did not end until the late 1980s.
And it must be pointed out, in that initial resistance against KMT in like late 1940s, a significant part of the movement was led by the communists.
Yeah, it wasn't all communists, but there was a significant part.
Yes.
There were also all sorts of opportunists, and there were also like just some people who were basically just thugs. There were all sorts of.
Yeah, I mean, exemplary opportunities would be Lee Tenghui, right? Because Lee Tenghui after his, he was an exemplary, Japanese subject during the Japanese colonial era, to the point that, both him and his brother volunteered for the Imperial Japanese Army. His older brother volunteered for the Imperial Japanese. They weren't drafted; they volunteered, and his older brother would volunteer for the Imperial Japanese Navy and was actually interviewed by the Japanese paper in Taiwan at the time. And he was on record of saying, I'm so proud to have this honor to serve the emperor, and to serve my country, Japan, and I'm willing to die for the emperor. And he got his wish, because he was sent to Manila, to Philippines, and he fought in the Battle of Manila, where he got killed. And as a result, as part of the Japanese war dead in World War II, he was moved into, he got his plaque in the Yasukuni Shrine in Japan, that shrine that worship all the Japanese war dead, and including Class A criminals from World War II. So when Lee Tenghui go visit Japan each time, he will make sure to make a Photoshop, like a photo op, a stop at the Yasukuni Shrine to worship, ostensibly to worship his brother. But he knows the movie is really going to piss off, people in China and the Chinese government, because Yasukuni Shrine, for people, both not only just China but also people in Korea, it symbolizes kind of it's really symbolized the Japanese war crime during World War II,
and it's never formally addressed.
Yes, because to the outsiders, the Japanese government explained, Yasukuni Shrine is just like a where we worship all our war dead, right? But what they don't explain is in 1970s, a bunch of Class A war criminals that were hung as a result of World War II, their plaque got moved into the shrine, and they were never moved out.
Yes. So there was white terror.
Can I interject for 1 second about Lee Tenghui himself? I almost forgot. So Lee Tenghui himself, after he finished university in Japan and returned to Taiwan, he himself volunteered to join the Japanese Imperial Army. So he was actually a member of the Japanese Imperial Army for a brief moment just before the Japanese surrender. And then when the KMT came, and when he was popular to be anti-KMT, he's at that time he actually joined the Taiwanese Communist Party for a brief period of time.
Very briefly, and he sold them out.
Yes, of course.
So basically white terror began, martial law began, and then June 24th, 1949, Chiang Kai-shek arrives in Taipei. And from then on, soldiers from the mainland migrated to Taiwan, totaling to approximately 1.2 million. So like I said before, Taiwan's demographic composition shifted greatly. And there was also a degree of de facto segregation between 本省人 and 外省人, because soldiers were given housing in what were called 眷村, which is like military dependent villages. So they had their own little, But then, like, the higher class you were, the more segregated you were. I mean, like, if you were like working class, there was more there was a higher degree of interaction with 本省人. So yeah,
you were telling me about a case of was it a restaurant owner who外省人, he could speak fluent 闽南话.
Yes, the restaurant where I work right now.
Oh, okay.
Part-time. Yeah, he's from a lower class because he's from Dacheng. Dacheng was like the island off of Zhejiang that was liberated in 1955. Yeah. And so then there were the last wave of migrants from the mainland. And
because KMT rounded up everyone on Dacheng and just forced them all to move to Taiwan, basically.
Yes. No Dacheng left behind. And they were all pretty much all of the good land and stuff were already taken in Taiwan, so they were in a pretty bad situation in Taiwan, which is why like a good number of them ended up leaving Taiwan, because a lot of them ended up becoming sailors and then a lot of them illegally immigrated when their ships landed in New York.
Literally jump ship.
Yeah, they literally, and then they started sending money back, remittances and whatever. So yeah, anyways, he could speak Minanhua, or like the local dialect in Taiwan, because when he was younger and couldn't speak it, he got beaten up for not being able to speak it. So he was like, yeah, when you're on someone else's gang territory, you got to learn their ways. Yeah. So basically, like I said, Benshengren were excluded from high levels of government, and this is a lot of recap, but this is very important when it comes to putting Lee Tenghui's leadership and his political legacy into context.
Yes.
And then there was also a case of petty bourgeois Benshengren holding classist attitudes towards many Waishengren, because under Japanese rule, I mean, China was a really poor country in the 40s, 50s, and then Taiwan under Japanese rule got some level of development. So then you had people coming from the mainland who had never seen elevators before. Yeah. So then if you're like from the middle class,
mainland China was in the process of civil war and then Japanese invasion. I mean, ever since 1911, right? I mean, Taiwan, in contrast, hasn't really experienced war until the last couple years of World War II. Before that, Taiwan was at peace. It's at Taiwanese citizens didn't have the equal rights as the Japanese, but they were at least lived in peace, compared to mainland where it was constant war and famine.
Yes. And around that time, Chiang Kai-shek, under the guise of currency reform, when he was still in the mainland, he collected the savings of the middle classes and just got a lot of gold, silver, and U.S. dollars, and was all worth approximately 300 million U.S. dollars. And most of this was sent to Taiwan.
My grandpa remember that. It's called Jinyuan Juan, which you were supposed to take your gold to trade in for these like promissory notes issued by the KMT government. And the KMT government is say don't keep your gold under your mattress, not safe. Let us deposit them in the banks. We'll just give you this paper money. It's a lot easier for
it'll be safe in Taiwan.
Yeah. And what they end up doing is shipping all those gold back to Taiwan and left all the mainlanders holding this worthless paper. And that's one of the reasons, KMT lost so much popular support during the last phase of the Civil War, because of things like that.
Yeah. Also, if you want to look at the most valuable Chinese national treasures, go to Taipei, because Chiang Kai-shek took all of them to the Palace Museum. Go to the Palace Museum in Beijing for the architecture. Go to the one in Taipei for the actual national treasures.
Yeah.
Anyways, so moving along, the KMT saw Benshengren as potential traitors because, like we mentioned, they were educated as Japan's colonial subjects. And then
Lee Tenghui himself said before age 22, he is Japanese.
Yes.
He said that on record in public.
Well, I think that's also a reflection of his class background, because I really doubt that some peasant family would really have that sort of consciousness.
That's true.
They were more worried about, just day-to-day life.
Yeah, that's true, because Lee Tenghui, he's a special case, because in high school, he went to all Japanese high school in Taiwan. Like, he was one of the only 4 native Taiwanese people in his class. The rest of them are all Japanese kids.
So this is also why some conspiracy theorists think that he's Japanese. But if he is the illegitimate son of a Japanese man from sexual assault, then they wouldn't admit that he's Japanese. So that logic is just it's a point.
And I think it's like I think the counterpoint that is, he comes from a small place where everybody knows everybody. Everybody knows everybody's business. I don't think you can hide something like that, from your neighbors.
Yeah. So then, Waishengren were also beneficiaries of affirmative action and civil servant examinations. So in 1956, the acceptance rate for Benshengren was only 0.061%, and then in 1960, only 13.8% of lieutenants, 9.5% of field officers, and 1.3% of general officers in the military were Taiwan-born, and this is including Taiwan-born 外省人. So most of them were born before 1949, and they were trained in the mainland. If you go watch the military parades from like up to the 60s and 70s, like they'll introduce the generals and whatever, and they're all mainlanders because they'll say this is General so and so, and he's a native of, for example, like Hunan province, and yeah. So clearly there was an era of 外省 superior or mainland superiority in Taiwan.
Yeah, because I mean, Chiang Kai-shek's main support on Taiwan are the military, and the military are from the mainland.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Chiang Kai-shek's legitimacy rested on two things. One was U.S. support after the Korean War began, because the U.S. was ready to just give them up.
Yeah, because Atchison at the time when he drew the line of defense, the so-called firewall on the Far East, he excluded Taiwan and Korea, and that was one of the main reasons that led up to Korea, because that led the Soviet camp, both Stalin and Kim Jong Il, Kim Il Sung to think that the U.S. didn't really care about South Korea, and so they that's one of the things that led to the Korean War, and also before that mainland was poised to launch the operation to take Taiwan, but everything changed because of the Korean War.
I can imagine just Mao going, "God damn it!" when the Korean War broke out. Like, just couldn't you Koreans just do your shit 1 year later?
But you know what? Mao was actually the person that pushed for the Chinese intervention in Korea, because at the time there was a big high-level discussion among the Politburo in China. There were many PLA generals who were hesitant to vote for the war in Korea, and in the end it was a split. They couldn't decide among themselves, so Mao stepped in and made the call that yes, China should get involved in Korea. So he made the ultimate call.
Yeah, and I think we can talk more about this in our future series that we talked about, that we might be doing on the war of aiding U.S. imperialist aggression, resisting U.S. imperialist aggression and aiding Korea.
Yes,
which is it's separate from the Korean War. It's the Korean War, but it's also separate from the Korean War, because this war is like from the Chinese perspective of China's intervention in the war. So there's debate on whether or not, like, on who won the Korean War, but there's no debate on how the war to aid Korea and resist U.S. imperialists was a victory for China, because it accomplished its goals of pushing the U.S. forces back to the 38th parallel.
Yes.
Anyways, moving along. So Chiang Kai-shek's legitimacy rested from U.S. support and also his policy of reclaiming the mainland, because, like Carl said, much of his support came from the military, and a lot of the military people went to Taiwan unwillingly. I mean, there's so many stories, especially among older 外省人 in Taiwan, who would say things like, "Oh, I was on the way to buy groceries for my parents, and then I got kidnapped by the National Army, and then next thing you know, I was sent to Taiwan, and I was told that this will only be temporary, and that I'll be back in the mainland soon." But then 1 year passed, 2 years passed, 3 years passed, and it never happened.
Yeah, for the Chinese people, there's a strong attachment to the place of your origin, right? To your hometown, to your village, and there's actually a Chinese saying, when you have old parents at home, you don't travel far, right? Because there's the whole Confucianist ideal of paying to have the filial piety to take care of your parents, right? You're not supposed to leave far away from home, so there's part of that.
Yeah. So then, because of the whole thing about reclaiming the mainland, many people felt that 本省人 were cannon fodder in the eyes of Chiang Kai-shek, since they felt that the KMT never really treated 本省人 as one of their own, and by extension, they thought that reclaiming the mainland would be a victory for some of the 外省人, but not necessarily benefit 本省人.
Yeah.
So you can tell that a lot of the KMT's issues in Taiwan stemmed from its gross mishandling of internal contradictions among the people.
Yeah.
Like this stuff, like it should have been more sensitive to, the cultural differences that arose just because of history. But then it was also it's kind of
cultural
hard.
Sensitivity is the last thing you can accuse of Chiang Kai-shek. So
True.
Yeah.
True. But what I'm saying is it was also in the context of the Chinese Civil War. Even if he wanted to do better, I don't know how much better he could have done. But he did do one thing that he didn't do on the mainland, which was carry out land reform, because he wasn't beholden to the landed aristocracy in Taiwan. Yes. So he could carry out land reform all he wanted, and he knew that if he didn't carry out land reform, he would have been screwed.
Yeah.
Because who was he overthrown by in the mainland? He was overthrown by peasants.
Yeah. Well, one of the things is that KMT knew full well what won the Communist War in mainland. They knew that land reform was hugely popular, but it's something that KMT cannot do because their main support came from the landed gentry. There's no if they do land reform, they lose even the support from the landlords. Because they have no support from among the peasantry, the common folks. So even though they knew they were doomed on the mainland, but they could not do the necessary reform that could save their ass. But in Taiwan, they could, because in Chiang Kai-shek's main support came from the army he brought in from mainland. He does not need to depend on the local landed gentry to perpetuate his rule.
Yes. And then as the mainland continued to develop its industrial base and successfully create nukes, and it also succeeded in having the PRC replacing the so-called ROC in the UN, because you have to remember, up until 1972, Chiang Kai-shek's government held the seat in the UN for all of China. And
yes.
Yeah,
and it was a very important seat because China is
Security
one
Council.
one of the 5 permanent member of the UN Security Council, and that's a result of World War II arrangement, post-World War II arrangement. All the victors, the 5 countries, Soviet Union, U.S., UK, France, and China. The 5 countries became the permanent members of UN Security Council. But Chiang Kai-shek held that seat despite being evicted from mainland.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like today how the mainland holds the seat for China, and that China represents all of China, including mainland China and Taiwan.
Yes.
So it's like it was a reverse back then. It was like there was a seat in the UN, but the people on the mainland were not truly represented.
And I also need to point out, any countries that have normalized diplomatic relationship with People's Republic of China, they must recognize PRC as a sole legitimate government of China. That includes Taiwan. And this is a official position of countries, including United States.
Yes.
that nominally, no, except for like 12 or 10 countries that recognize Taiwan diplomatically, super majority of the countries in the world recognize Beijing government as the sole legitimate government of all of China, including Taiwan.
See, even then, those countries that have diplomatic relations with Taiwan, they don't recognize Taiwan as a country. They recognize the so-called Republic of China, which Taiwan is a province of, according to the Constitution. I mean, in practice today, not many people go around saying that or thinking that, but it's just kind of what's left over of the Constitution. And a lot of people like to make jokes about, oh, like you lost the Civil War, you did this, but you also claim to be the real China. Well, that's just the result of a unfinished Civil War, because it never ended in a peace treaty.
Wait, so nowadays, do they still, I mean, what about what kind of maps are printed out in Taiwan? Do they still have the Republic of China map that includes mainland China and Mongolia and the Tuva and also Tuva?
You can find them. It's very hard to.
Okay.
Most of the maps, they have Chinese maps, which show the modern day borders with modern day provincial borders, and then it'll have a little note on the bottom saying according to the People's Republic of China government, the capital is in Beijing, but according to our constitution, the capital is in Nanjing, and Taipei is the temporary capital of the. Side note, Taiwan's
So they
area
have a
codes.
disclaimer
Yeah,
on the bottom. Okay.
yeah. Side note, in Taiwan, there's different area codes for different cities and counties. So Taipei City is 02, like Taoyuan is like 03, and then Taichung is like 04, so on. Tainan is like
What's
06, Kaohsiung is 07. What is
what's
01?
01?
Yes.
Nanjing?
Yes.
Oh wow.
It's like there it's just there as it's kind of like an ideological thing, but in reality it was like Chiang Kai-shek's hotline. Yeah.
Okay.
So anyways, as this happened, as the mainland was, on the global arena, on the international arena, it was, standing up and kind of just outmaneuvering the so-called free world. The whole policy of reclaiming the mainland it became even more apparent that it was nothing but a dream and a slogan. And without a realistic political goal, there was this sort of ideological vacuum in Taiwan.
Yeah.
So by this time, there was a sizable Bensheng petty bourgeoisie that was against the KMT, but also liberal, unlike past opponents of the KMT that were more left-leaning.
Because the left opposition of KMT got ruthlessly crushed in the aftermath of 1947. The period between 1947 and 1950s, that period of white terror, Chiang Kai-shek was very effective in cracking down on his opposition. The people were either had to run away to mainland or being rounded up and sent to jail or killed.
So I'm gonna read I'm gonna translate on the fly this excerpt from the Taiwan 人民自救宣言, or the Declaration of Taiwan, the Taiwanese people's self-salvation. Over here, written by Peng Minmin, Xie Congmin, and Wei Tingchao.
Basically, the godfather of Taiwan independence movement, right?
Yes, just to kind of show you guys how this opposition, to the KMT thought. So, part 7 says in a developing area like Taiwan, the economic development is in effect a big revolution in areas of culture, society, and economy. And 政治则为一切推动的源泉. So, and politics is the origin of all of the forces that push these changes. So, basically saying that Taiwan has all of the has the necessary solid foundation for all of this stuff, but because of the corrupt and incapable Chiang Kai-shek regime, 我们距离现代化仍然非常遥远. We're still at a great distance from attaining true modernization. So yeah, so they're basically saying our goals are to recognize that reclaiming the mainland is totally impossible, and that we need to overthrow the Chiang Kai-shek regime and unite all 12 million Taiwanese people. The population today is 23 or 24 million. Back then it was, this was written in 1964. Anyways, 不分省级. So regardless of provincial origins, we need to cooperate and establish a new republic and a new government. And then the third part of this section saying that as a part of the free world, we need to enter the United Nations and establish diplomatic relations with all peace-loving countries and fight for world peace. Which is funny because he's totally ignoring what free world actually means, because under U.S. hegemony, Chiang Kai-shek qualifies as the free world. Free world just means you kowtow to Washington, and you don't necessarily kowtow to them, but you don't get in their way of establishing their goals.
I remember when I first came to U.S. in 1990, in the Chicago Public Library, I found a publication called the Free China Pictorial. And I was like, oh, what is this? And I picked it up, and I realized it was published in Taiwan. And it's basically covering everything on Taiwan, but they call it Free China because Taiwan was a free China back then. Consider free China in U.S., even though it's run by the KMT dictatorship.
So my dad used to study on his own acupuncture as a hobby, and he has books, Chinese books and Korean books, because he grew up in Korea. And I was just going through one of his acupuncture books, and it talked about this sort of convention that was held in Taipei. But it wrote in the book, 자유 중국 대북, 自由中国台北. Taipei of free China. Anyways, so yes, there was this new sort of opposition to the KMT was fomenting. And then Chiang Kai-shek dies in 1975, and he was replaced by the vice leader Yan Jiagan for the remainder of his term. And then when the remainder of his term was fulfilled, Jiang Jingguo, his son, replaced him. So
I mean, Yan Jiagan is basically a placeholder person for Jiang Jingguo to take over, because
it's kind of like a chess.
Because Jiang Jingguo has always been groomed for succession, even when he just after he returned from Soviet Union.
Yeah, he was already the so-called premier of the government. Anyways, so it was kind of like chess. You know how you when you castle the king, you kind of just move it over and then.
Yes.
So Jiang Jingguo era, there's heavy emphasis on economic development. There was also a shift in the attitude towards Ben Shengren, and Jiang Jingguo really tried to start getting them involved in politics at higher levels of government. And this coincided with the 10 major construction projects, which we went over in our previous episode, so I'm not going to really go into. Basically, it's just developing an industrial base and really making Taiwan one of the 4 Asian tigers.
Yes.
And as Japan was entering a post-industrial era, Taiwan was doing more low-level manufacturing for Japanese companies. So then this sort of export-oriented period of industrialization was kind of what happened during the Jiang Jingguo era.
Well, actually, the experience of Taiwan, South Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, the 4 Asian tigers, if anything, it's kind of repudiate the U.S. or free market orthodoxy that only liberal democracy can lead to development, right?
Very, very unliberal and very not free market. It's not socialism, but it's state-controlled capitalism.
Yes,
it's very top-down. And there's some variations, like the South Korean model and the Taiwanese model were very different. There was more involvement of small to medium-sized businesses in Taiwan, and there's less social inequality in Taiwan than in the bad part of Korea. Anyways, there was this sort of Jiang Jingguo actively brought Ben Shengren to higher levels of power, and this sort of policy was called 催台青政策. Or the promotion of the Taiwanese youth, or as I like to describe it, I guess for the Chinese viewers, 会吹牛的台湾青年.
the bullshitting Chinese
the Taiwanese youth who know how to bullshit their way up into power. So this brought the likes of Lee Tenghui, Wu Dunyi, and Wu Boxiong into the higher echelons of the KMT. And
so that's a really amazing story how Lee Tenghui climbed up the career ladder within the KMT, because he started in opposition. He started for a very brief period of time as a member of the Communist Party, and this history was actually well known to the KMT, and yet somehow he became part of the KMT bureaucracy.
Yes. So now we're really gonna get into Lee Tenghui. So this dude. grew up in Japanese era, whatever, and then he joined the Communist Party. He left the Communist Party like in a year, and then he swore that he would keep this all a secret, but somehow like he was part of a reading group, and everyone he had introduced into that reading group was either executed or jailed, but he got off like with not even a slap on the wrist. You would think that he would get into more trouble since he's the one who introduced the other people into the group, but whatever. A snitch is a snitch. I get into this in another episode. So, studied abroad in the 1950s.
I like your nickname for him, the Judas of the Judas.
Yeah. Studied abroad in the 1950s, and he received his master's in agricultural economics at Iowa State University. And then he returned to Taiwan in 1957 and worked as an economist at the Sino-American Joint Commission on Rural Reconstruction. This was a commission established in 1948, and then it moved to Taiwan in 1949. Yeah. And then he kind of worked there as just kind of, he just kind of did agricultural stuff and just policies in that regard. And then in the 1960s, he went to Cornell to do his PhD. And then he returned to Taiwan and then worked as an adjunct professor in National Taiwan University's economics department. So then in the 1970s, when Jiang Jingguo was the so-called premier of the so-called ROC, Lee Tenghui became a cabinet member in Jiang Jingguo's cabinet. And he was actually the youngest member. So this was part of Jiang Jingguo's effort to get Ben Shengren involved into higher levels of government. And then as fate, and then because of fate,
keep talking for a second. I'm just gonna grab some water. I'll be right back. But keep talking.
Okay. So then, in 1984, he becomes the vice leader, and 4 years later, Jiang Jingguo passes away, and there wasn't direct elections in Taiwan at the time. So what happens is when the president, so-called president, dies, the vice president finishes off his term, and then after the term is completed, then there's election. Then there needs to be an election in the National Assembly. So then when that happened, there was this sort of controversy in the KMT as to let Lee Tenghui continue with the second term or to replace him with a Waisheng elite. And this marked the beginning of a factional battle within the KMT, the 主流 and 非主流, the mainstream and non-mainstream factions. So basically, you had like the older Waisheng elite who felt that this is our territory, like this is our thing, like what are you doing here? But then there's also like the more pragmatic sections of the KMT saying, hey, this is what we need to do if we want to maintain our legitimacy, you know. So around this time, there's this sort of, so where are we? So what
Two factions.
Yes.
Two factions fighting.
Yes. And then when Jiang Jingguo died, right before he died, he lifted martial law. And during this time, there was a lot of the petty bourgeois opposition to the KMT was at its peak. There was the Formosa incident, which marked the beginning of pretty much it didn't mark the beginning. There was something called the Dangwai movement. There was a ban on political parties except for the KMT. So then what people did was they had this sort of alliance of all independents, all people who didn't have party affiliations, but who were all against the KMT. And then that evolved into what is the Democratic Progressive Party today.
The DPP.
Yes. Now, during all of this time, Lee Tenghui was never really part of the Dangwai movement. He was kissing his ass in the KMT. I mean, look at the way he's sitting in this picture with Jiang Jingguo. You notice anything in particular?
Yeah. I mean, he has a big smile on his face.
No, not that. Because in traditional Chinese culture, like, to show respect, you don't appear too comfortable in front of your superiors.
Ah, yes.
He's only his ass is only a third of his ass is on the chair. So he's like sitting really upright, and he's sitting like really upright, and
Yeah.
he's like his hands are on his kneecaps,
Yeah.
just like very, very serious, like
Yeah.
discipline.
Just so our audience know, that's how I am sitting right now talking to you.
What? And then he would do things like because Lee Tenghui was a pretty tall guy, and Jiang Jiguo was pretty short. So when he would walk around, like in pictures, you would see him just kind of in the back, just kind of slouched over or whatever, like smiling, or just to not appear too tall. And then during that time, he would always, if you look at his collected works, all of them would talk about things like what we need to do as the Chinese nation, like what we need to do to fight for a free and democratic China. And his idea of free and democratic at the time was like the KMT, like
yeah, of course.
And what we need to, and how we need to strive for national unity and reunification.
Yeah.
And all of that. So
he knows how to talk the talk.
So I don't really think. And did you read the little article I sent you yesterday, written by Peng Mingmin after Lee Tenghui's death?
I think I read part of it, but go ahead, give us a refresher.
Basically, Peng Mingmin said that early on when he knew Lee Tenghui in college and he tried to talk about Taiwan independence. I mean, I don't know how true like all of this stuff is, but this is from his account. Lee Tenghui was not really interested in that, and he would just talk about agricultural issues. So I think it's not that Lee Tenghui was truly a leader of Taiwan independence, but rather he knew where political opportunities were.
Yes.
Because like up until the later 90s, it was not very popular at all to be for Taiwan independence.
Yep.
I remember because I was born in 1993, and I remember like my mom is from Tainan. Tainan is a stronghold for the DPP, the party that's more affiliated with separatism. And even when I was a little kid there, like when I was when I was like 4 or 5, Lee Tenghui was still the leader of Taiwan. People were still calling themselves Chinese.
Yep.
Yeah. So it wasn't really until
people can go just watch early 90s Taiwanese movies. I mean, there's a very famous Taiwanese comedy called Shaolin Xiaozi.
Actually, continue. I need to go pee.
Okay, go ahead. There's actually a early 90s Taiwanese comedy called Shaolin Xiaozi, and in Indonesia they know as Boboho, and my fiance knew about it because that was very popular in Indonesia as well. And in the movie itself, it presents the life of a middle class family in early 90s Taiwan. You talk about all the issues of the day. I mean, you cover all the issues of the day. Like the dad was a factory manager. Mainland China was opening up, so he was moving factories from Taiwan to mainland. And the mom is worried about that the dad was gonna hook up with some mainland mistress, and eventually they all went to mainland, right? And so that was part of the plot of the story. But you can see from movies like this, there was, people in Taiwan still view themselves as Chinese. I mean, there was no conflict between being Taiwanese and Chinese. Yes, they're Taiwanese, but Taiwan is part of China, so they're Taiwanese and Chinese. There's no conflict to that. But that start to change in the Lee Tenghui era, and
not
then
by much.
Okay.
Because I was talking to my friend the other day, talking about his education, and he said that it wasn't until high school that they started really changing what was being taught in school. So even when throughout Lee Tenghui's leadership, it was all like learning a lot of Chinese history and like being taught that we're Chinese. There was less of the whole like when my mom was little, they needed to like recite things about how we need to save our mainland compatriots from the communists, and and liberate the mainland. I mean, that kind of stopped by the time Lee Tenghui was the leader.
Oh yeah, you show me a clip of a Taiwanese movie where it's about this high school class that were cheating, right? And then they did
No, they weren't cheating. They were like it was like a remedial class of like just it's a school of like just problem students.
yeah.
Yeah, and then basically the teacher wanted to prove that you know, he was able to help the kids out and steer them on the right path.
Yeah, and then so he gave them a pop quiz, right? And in class, and the question he asked was all like, you know, what is the capital of like the province of Henan, or what is the
No, much difficult than that. It's like name all the provinces that the Yangtze River passes through, and what is the highest, what is the largest, what's the and rank the recite the largest like 2 or 3 like freshwater lakes or whatever.
Wow. Okay, I knew that, but I doubt many people who, you know, grow outside of China, like in the diaspora, would know that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like even like which province Yangtze River passed through, I have to like, kind of think about it and have a mental picture of where all the Yangtze River go through, because there's a lot.
So I mean, economically, Lee Tenghui just kind of, it was like, I think it was a continuation of the Jiang Jingguo era, like, you know, pro-US, like Japan, South Korea, and stuff like that.
There's actually a joke. There's a joke I saw sharing around on the Chinese internet about how Li Tenghui became the successor of Jiang Jingguo, right? So the joke goes, you know, Jiang Jingguo was going to the toilet, but the...
Didn't I tell you this joke?
What's that?
Didn't I tell you this joke?
I might have heard that joke before, but go ahead. Why don't you tell the joke? You're probably better at it.
But your dad's from Zhejiang. You can do his accent better.
No. I have a Sichuan accent. I don't do the Zhejiang accent. Go ahead.
So, Jiang Jingguo was in the bathroom and like, you know, peeing, and this person outside was knocking the door saying, "Hey, President, who do you want to be who do you want to be your vice candidate, or to be your partner?" And he said, what is it? 你等会儿, which means like, wait a minute, but it sounded like 李登辉.
because Jiang Jingguo is from Zhejiang, right? So he has like his dad, Chiang Kai-shek, they have a heavy Zhejiang accent. And so when they speak Mandarin with a Zhejiang accent, it sounds like, when he said Li Tenghui, it means you wait a minute, you know, wait a minute. But it sounds like Li Tenghui, the name.
I haven't heard him say Li Tenghui before, so I can't really imitate it because I don't know like the patterns of that like accent well enough to imitate
it's
it.
Ningbo accent, yeah. Ningbo
but
accent.
I can say Jiangyu the way he says it pretty well.
Oh, how do you say Jiangyu?
Jiangyu. Because there was that whole speech. 不要用买酱油的钱去买醋.
He actually said that in a public speech?
No, there was a speech about misappropriation, and he told a story about how when he was a kid, his grandmother gave him 2 coins, one for which to buy soy sauce and the other to buy vinegar with. And then he tripped at the front door and he didn't remember which coin was which. So he went to ask his grandma, and his grandma was like, "Oh, you're so stupid. They're both the same." But then he said like, "But then we can't have this sort of attitude when we're talking about like money." Like he's saying what did he say? 赚钱要恰当，要正当. Like the way we earn money, it needs to be legitimate, and we can't you have to use money the right way. You can't misappropriate things. You can't be corrupt. You know, you can't use the soy sauce money for vinegar, and you can't use vinegar money for soy sauce, which makes me think the whole story is stupid because his grandma told him the coins were the same. Funny enough,
okay. I can laugh at this because my dad is from Zhejiang, okay? I can laugh at the Zhejiang accent. But okay, go ahead. Continue with your story.
So, you know, Li Tenghui, the Mandarin he spoke is pretty interesting because it's very unusual because, like,
yeah,
Taiwan,
well,
like, sorry?
Oh, you're talking about Li Tenghui. I thought you were talking about Jiang
Oh no
Jingguo.
no
Because
no, Jiang Jingguo is typical. It's just like Ningbo, like whatever. Li Tenghui, because like he has like this sort of typical Bensheng accent, but it's heavily influenced by Jiang Jingguo. Yeah, like what did he say? I forgot, but it's
Okay.
this sort of it's this sort of hybrid between like a typical like Taiwanese accent from that era and Jiang
Mhm.
Jingguo's accent.
Because he kissed ass of Jiang Jingguo for so many years, it just rub off on him.
So
Yes.
interestingly, I mean, everybody's like castigating Li Tenghui for being like the forefather of enabling Taiwan independence and whatever. And I don't think that this is the right approach to analyzing the politics of Taiwan, because it's also ignoring many other factors of just on the global scale. I mean, one of the things is, and this kind of goes along with people, his supporters in Taiwan calling him the father of democracy. I don't think he's the father of democracy, and I think you can call him the father of modern day liberalism in Taiwan. I think you can call him that.
Yes.
You can't call him the
Yes.
father of democracy, because what had happened was, notice how the bourgeois democratization process in South Korea happened. When did that happen?
That's like late 80s, right?
When did Taiwan's democratization happen?
Early 90s.
And starting from the late 80s.
Yeah.
You had stuff like the Meili Dao Shijian, the
Yeah.
Formosa incident, and all that, which kind of brought the DPP to power.
Yeah, it all happened around, near the end of the Cold War, when it like after the Gorbachev's perestroika, and I mean it's like a lot of things happened like late 80s. On one
Yes.
hand, the Soviet Union, it was Gorbachev at the helm. It was already climbing down from like basically Cold War with the Western camp, right? And
That's one factor.
yeah,
Want to get
go
into the
talk about.
economic factor?
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So places like South Korea and Taiwan were also going through like this sort of process of you know, in the context of like neoliberalism headed by the US. Places like there was a new source of cheap labor, the recently opened up Chinese mainland. So
Yes.
what did Taiwan need? What could Taiwan provide them that the US wanted? The more white collar type workers, right? As opposed to the cheap blue collar workers that it provided previously, making televisions and shoes and whatever, right?
Yeah. I
So then
actually remember when I first came to US in 1990, like made in Taiwan was almost like a dirty derogatory term. There was like movies where George Clooney was trying to open an umbrella and he broke and he said, "Oh, it's made in Taiwan." Like that explains everything, right? This
yeah,
was like early 1990. Yeah.
yeah. So then the type of so then the government that the US wanted Taiwan to have was less of the heavy-handed military right-wing dictatorship that existed in the past, but rather a liberal democracy that was beneficial for like the middle classes, like middle class opportunists, and breeding that sort of ideology. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And then there's also like Carl said, the end of the Cold War. I mean, the US props up these very reactionary right-wing governments all the time, like from Syngman Rhee, Pinochet, and all of that. But it also knows that it's bad optics, especially when you have like cases like when there was a lot of just bad press from the KMT coming out at that time, like the incident with the guy that Jiang Jingguo's government killed.
Oh, the Jiang An, right?
Yeah, Jiang Nan, the author who
The
wrote
Taiwanese
a
author who wrote a biography of Jiang Jingguo, and then the Taiwanese intelligence services send assassin to United States to kill him. Yeah.
yeah. So it's kind of interesting because Taiwanese liberals will be like, oh, that's because like the KMT is Chinese and that's what Chinese people do. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. This sort of stuff the US perfected long before there was a KMT.
Yep.
If you look at the way strikes were broken, if you look at the way the labor movements were crushed in the U.S., like the way that, you know, governments, city governments or whatever, work with the mafia, it's all from like the U.S.'s playbook.
Yeah.
So the 90s, this was also a